In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be going through the patch changes for 1.1.0a. This is the balancing patch for Season 1, and I imagine all of these are going to come into effect beginning with Season 1, and will obviously apply to characters outside of the season as well as in the season. And we'll go through what some of these changes are, as well as, what is happening with the classes. I know a lot of people are discussing that things got gutted, but let's actually go through some of this, and I think you'll see that not everything is as bad as it initially seems. So briefly looking at the 6 unique items, it looks like there is a Uber unique that gives a random shrine buff. Good luck getting that one. The Barbarian sword that's been added is great for our Ice Vortex Barbarian build, so if you've been playing that, consider using that. The Flesh Render unique item that makes it so that you deal damage to nearby poisoned enemies when using Debilitating Roar and Bloodhowl seems interesting, but I'm not sure it's good enough to be used by the current meta, so we'll have to see how that is. Necromancer using Lidless Wall, a unique shield. This affects Bone Storm, allowing you to cast Bone Storms in certain locations, applying to your sacrifice bonus, or your sacrifice bonus increases the chances of this happening. So this makes you better as a Bone Necromancer, or any Necromancer that uses Bone Storm and doesn't have minions, which is basically the meta. So that's a great shield for, meta Necromancers. Rogue got a unique bow that affects penetrating shots, so if you're playing Pen Shot Rogue, this is great for you. And Sorcerer has a unique wand that makes it so that they gain the effect of the Teleport enchantment for free. And when you evade using Teleport enchantment, you're taken to a random location. This is going to be interesting. I imagine some Sorcerers will use this, but the random property of it, I'm not sure. We'll have to see how this is in practice. When taking a look at the legendary aspects, the two here that are general, the one that stuns enemies, could be good on very high difficulties of the game where you actually need to stun things when there's a big group to save you, especially if you don't have a ton of CC. But most classes have CC at higher levels, so I'm not sure this is a huge thing, but it's definitely one that I could see some builds running. The Craven aspect, increasing your mobility, moving away from slow to chill enemies, has very, very limited application. If this is on your boots, then I think it might be worth using, but a lot of people who chill are using, Penitent Greaves, so those are going to conflict, so I'm not sure this is going to see a lot of use. Barbarian's Ancestral Charge. Charge calls forth 4 Ancients who also charge, dealing 50 to 100% damage. This could be good for builds that use Charge. Some builds use this, and this is definitely a buff, but we'll see. A lot of Barbarian builds have a lot of aspects they need for them to work, so I'm not sure this one's going to find a home or not. Taking a look at Druid, the Subterranean offensive aspect makes it so that Poison Creeper's active ability also casts Landslide in a circle around you. As if we didn't have enough Landslide builds for Druid, they want to give us another one, so I could see this one being used quite frequently. Poison Creeper is used in most, Landslide builds, so this is definitely one I can see being used quite a lot. Necromancer got Gore Quills. This makes it so Blood Lance will consume blood orbs to also conjure lances from them, and each additional Blood Lance deals 20 to 50% of normal damage, and prioritizes targets that are unlanced. This is huge for a Blood Lance build. This actually makes Blood Lance extremely deadly, and Blood Lance was, borderline, I wouldn't say borderline meta, it wasn't even close to meta, but it was playable, right? You could play it and it would work, but this makes it really, really strong. I think if you're playing a Blood Lance build, this is going to be a must. Problem with Blood Lance builds is they already are extremely hungry for aspects, so that means you're going to have to bump something else out, and that's going to be difficult to do. Pestilent points for Rogue. This makes every third cast of Puncture is poison imbued with 100 to 150% of normal potency. This is not that great, in my opinion. I don't see anyone running this. Sorcerer Searing Wards. After spending 200 to 100 mana, your next Firewall is free to cast and will destroy incoming small missiles. I can see Firewall builds running this. This seems one that will probably see some play. Looking over the bug fixes, I am going to go through some of these. I'm not going to go through all of them because there are a lot. A lot of the ones that draw my attention immediately are in the cooperative play, particularly with local co-op. Fex and I experienced massive problems playing local co-op on PS5, so I'm glad to see there are some changes here, particularly with the camera. That was particularly annoying. And there are just some good changes for, co-op play if you're playing local. So if you've been having trouble with that, it should be a bit better after this patch as well. There are also a lot of good dungeon bug fixes here. A lot of the dungeons in the game were bugged, like you couldn't complete them sometimes when you're running them, like a significant number of them. It looks like a lot of these have been patched. So I imagine the dungeon running experience will be a lot better from this point forward when this patch goes live as well. So taking a look at Barbarian, it seems like there are issues with some of the aspects that they have there that are stacking for absurd amounts of damage. I guess this isn't intended, so I imagine Barbarians, even though just looking through their their buffs and nerfs. It looks like they were mostly buffed in their skills. Looks like they're getting a huge nerf across the board just from these bugs that are being fixed. So I'd expect Barbarians, even with those buffs, are probably going to come out a little bit further behind than they were before. Looking through Druid, there are a couple that catch my attention, some bugs that definitely needed fixing, but the one that really jumps out to me that is going to be devastating is Stormclaw's Aspect allowed Shred to do extreme amount of damage. Apparently that's an issue. This made Shred really, really fun to use, so if you're playing a Shred Druid, you're probably going to see a drastic damage reduction, particularly if you're using like our Shredder build. Nothing seriously noteworthy in Necromancer. And Rogue doesn't have any major bug fixes other than apparently the Awakened glyph would not spawn if people were using Improved Barrage. That is a weirdly specific bug. Glad that's fixed. Sorcerer looks like it had a ton of bug fixes. For instance, Firebolt enchantment did not contribute to Combustion Key passive. Deep Freeze would prevent the Ice Shard enchantment effect from triggering. Aspect of Control is applying its damage bonus 3 times for staggered bosses. So I guess when you staggered a boss, you would do way crazy high damage. And another issue with Incinerate, costing 30 mana up front, and then the channeling cost, when apparently it was only supposed to cost channeling. That's been fixed. So significant bug fixes there for Sorc as well. They made a little bit of a change here to help with itemization. Item requirements for sacred items now cap at level 60, or the level requirement rather, and the level requirement for Ancestral now cap at 80. So you only need to get a character up to maximally level 60 to use any sacred item, and maximum level 80, which I think is a good change. It would really suck if you got an item at like level 90 on your character and you couldn't give it to a level 80 character. Honestly, I'm not really sure what the purpose of, level equipment is in this game. If you took the time to farm equipment on your Necromancer to give to another Necromancer character you made, first of all, how many people are going to make 2 Necromancer characters? I guess some people will. But if you took the time to farm the gear for that Necromancer, shouldn't you just be able to funnel it over? Who cares if you're OP till you get up to whatever level your current Necromancer is? I guess maybe it's a season thing, but if you couldn't transfer between season characters and can do it outside, I don't see why that would be an issue. But I feel like this is a change in the right direction. Another serious bug fix is that the Ring of Mother's Embrace unique did not trigger properly with several abilities. They didn't even list what these are. The fact that it's several means it's probably a lot. That's a really useful ring. So I imagine that will be a lot more beneficial to use in your build now. One bug fix that's been changed that I'm not sure I'm happy about is fixed an issue where items of higher power than intended were dropping from rare monsters. I don't know exactly what they mean by this because it's very vague, but I mean, I'm assuming that means that the item power of items you're going to gain is going to be lower than it was on average, which, would kind of suck. So moving along to general gameplay updates, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm not going to list them all. I'm just going to list the important ones. Altar of Lilith unlocks are now count-wide, which is great. Map Discovery is now count-wide, which is great. Overall loot quality has been significantly improved in silent chests. These were garbage before. It looks like it takes you longer to leave a dungeon now than it did before. I guess people maybe were teleporting out when maybe on like hardcore characters or something. I don't know why that's a problem. They've also added DualSense Edge wireless controller support for PC. This is great for me. I played like my entire playthrough pre-launch on a DualSense Edge wireless controller, and I had to like install third-party software. That probably doesn't matter to most people though. Moving along. Renown values have been adjusted. Side quest renown increased to 30 and dungeon renown increased to 40. This is great to get your renown faster. I know people are not necessarily looking forward to getting renown, having to get renown, but this will make it a little bit better. World Tier 2 also got a bit of a buff. World Tier 2 basically doesn't even need to exist in this game, so it's going to have more gold, and also monsters drop more items. So on the item side, this is a great change for Tier 2, I think. Looks like level scaling inside dungeons on most overworld territories has been adjusted for World Tiers 3 and 4. It looks like it's made them easier, so you shouldn't have as hard of a time on the landscape to make you feel a bit powerful on the landscape, but this doesn't apply to World Bosses, Legion Events, Field of Hatred, Helltide, or Nightmare Dungeons. So you're going to feel powerful on regular dungeons and on the landscape, but then, it's going to kind of go back to how it was in Nightmare Dungeons, etc. It looks like Whisper's quests have had their experience increased from World Tiers 3 and 4, but really the major change here is that the amount of experience gained from enemies that were higher than you used to cap at 25% at 3 levels higher, now it caps at 15% at 10 levels higher. So while that gives you more of an incentive to do higher level content, it's also going to make your progress much, much slower on average. So this is a huge nerf to, leveling in general as a character, which I think a lot of people are not going to be happy with, including myself. It also seems like they are nerfing the amount of experience you gain from being carried over to a higher difficulty as a lower level character. So it'll take you, if I'm just looking at these numbers, if you get to tier 4 very, very quickly, it looks like you'll gain about 10% of the XP that you would gain previously, like extra XP, not just regular XP. So power leveling is going to take a lot longer as well. Helltides look like they've been made more difficult. The levels higher than the character are now 3 instead of 2. It takes 250 Aberrant Cinders to open the Chest of Mysteries, or a Gift of Mysteries chest, instead of 175. That's a huge increase. And all interactable objects now only have a small chance of dropping Aberrant Cinders. So apparently they want to slow down progress on the Helltides. That's kind of unfortunate. Honestly, I feel like Helltides were a nice break from the dungeon grind to just go and have like a loot farm real quick. And honestly, it seems like the theme of this patch is less fun, more grind. I mean, that's where we're at right now so far, and we haven't even got to the balancing update for classes. So just going through Barbarian Changes, I'm not going to go through these like intensely like I normally do, but it looks like they got a lot of buffs here. They do have a couple nerfs. Power charge cooldown reduction is now capped at 3 targets if you knock them back, so you can't probably get instant recast like you could before. So that's a bit of a nerf there. And then also the cut to the bone bleeding damage bonus to vulnerable enemies has been reduced by a little bit of percentage. So that's a bit of a nerf. But everything else on that list there looks like it got buffed. That's not like all Barbarian skills, but everything else seems to have gotten buffed there. So for the most part on the skills, they got buffed. But I think overall, because of the bug fixes, their damage is going to be a lot less, particularly if they're using Hammer of the Ancients. So taking a look at Druid next, they got a lot of subtle buffs to a lot of their aspects and a lot of their skills. Definitely a lot of needed buffs here, but there are a couple things that were nerfed that are the things that really grabbed my attention. Storm Strike's damage reduction got reduced from 25 to 15%. That's a huge thing, although I think Storm Strike's damage reduction was a bit high to begin with, so that's not super surprising. But the major one, Masochistic, now also requires Lucky Hit. So this would previously give you like healing when you critically struck with a shape-shifting skill. Now this is, when you lucky hit, you have a 75% chance to heal with a critical strike, I'm assuming. So that's, a huge nerf really to that skill. I mean, this is not going to trigger nearly as much. That was probably overtuned. I don't know if it's needed that much of a nerf, but we'll have to see. Another big nerf was the symbiotic aspect cooldown reduction, going from 4 to 8 to 3 to 5. This used to make Nature's Fury builds just be able to spam landslide like really, really fast. You'll still be able to do it quickly, but it won't be as quick as before. So that's a bit of a nerf if you're using like the Nature's Fury landslide spam kind of build that, we have a build like that up. Taking a look at Necromancer, the things that immediately jump out to me are that Sever has had its vulnerable reduced on Paranormal Sever down from 4 to 3. This means that if you're using any of our like Sever builds with our Necromancers, you are stronger now. Enhanced Bloodlance damage reduction got reduced from 15 to 10%. This means Bloodlance is now stronger. So again, if you're playing Bloodlance between that and the new aspect, you should be stronger. Blood Surge's healing has been increased, so if you're playing a Blood Necro that's using Blood Surge, you should also be stronger, at least healing more. There are also a lot of really good buffs to just general things, particularly minions and golems. They got another bit of a round of buffs here. Just general little bits of buffs here and there. So I think minions in general are in a better spot now than they were before. So if you were playing a minion necro, you should be a little bit happier with the way your minions are. I don't think anything here is going to make them amazing, but they definitely should be a little better. Probably the biggest nerfs in necro, though, are to bone skills. This is not a big surprise here. Avulsion got nerfed down a few percentage. That affects bone skills. Splintering aspect, bone shard, and damage got reduced from 50 to 100% to 30 to 60. That's a pretty significant nerf. Also, aspect of Grasping Veins critical strike damage bonus got reduced from 30 to 60 to 20 to 40. That was a pretty substantially good aspect, so that's taken down a bit. I think just about every necro runs that at endgame. But otherwise, besides those things, it seems like most of the class was buffed. So bone was kind of taken down a bit, and it looks like everything else was pretty much buffed for Necromancer. Not a huge surprise there. Taking a look at Rogue, it looks like they were mostly buffed across the board. Just about everything seems to have been buffed. The one nerf that stands out to me is Siphoning Strikes. This would make it so that you would heal when you would critically strike close range enemies. Now that's a lucky hit chance in order to pull that off, so that's a pretty significant nerf. It's going to make you heal for a lot less as a rogue, so you're going to be a lot less tanky as a rogue. But it looks like just about everything else was buffed, so this will probably come out better for off meta builds, but it'll probably be worse for just about anyone using Siphoning Strikes, which is, frankly, just about every rogue. So moving along to Sorc, they got a lot of buffs here as well, but the big nerf here is, or a couple nerfs here they got, is Devouring Blaze critical strike damage has been reduced, and also to immobilize targets has been reduced. So if you're using a fire build that's using Devouring Blaze, which is just about every fire build, then your damage is going to go down a bit. Other changes here are Aspect of Disobedience. Maximum stacks is reduced from 100 to 60, making it much, much less effective. Aspect of Retribution has been nerfed. Exploiter's Aspect's been nerfed. Starlight Aspect for resource gain got buffed by about double. This is what I've been trying to get for forever for one of my builds. But that's a nice change on Starlight. But those have been nerfed, making them not nearly as powerful as before. Also, monster HP scaling went from 85% to 100% bonus per extra player in the party. So it's going to be harder to kill enemies in a group than it was previously. Another major changes that's happening is that the core bonus on weapons has been overperforming apparently. So that's being nerfed by about 50%. So that's going to reduce the overall damage of all players. Cooldown reduction is being reduced by 30%. This is definitely going to affect sorcerers a lot. They have a lot of cooldowns. Imbuement skill cooldown reduction has been reduced by 30%. This is going to affect rogues that, pretty much every rogue build. And trap skill cooldown reduction is also going to be reduced by 30%. So it's going to affect, trapper rogues as well, which I think is definitely very meta right now. Critical strike damage is being reduced by 17% approximately. Lightning critical strike damage reduced. Critical strike damage with bone, earth, imbued, and werewolf skills reduced. That affects all those classes. That's Necromancer, Druid, Rogue, and those three classes. Vulnerable damage reduced by 40%. So those are just nerfs across the board to basically everyone. Critical strike damage on swords reduced. Vulnerable damage on crossbows reduced. 50% on swords, 65% on crossbows. Rogues getting gutted pretty hard here. Damage to crowd control enemies decreased by 30% across the board, and damage to frozen enemies increased. So if you're playing a frozen build, which was like pretty much a lot of people already, the damage is going to go up on that, but pretty much everything else is going to go down. And it looks like they've added increased damage from about 25 to 40% for just about every other damage type in the game. So they're basically taking the multipliers, critical strike, vulnerable, the ones that are really cranking out the damage on builds, and buffed all the additive ones instead of the multipliers. So your damage in general is going to go down, but obviously it wouldn't go down as much as if they hadn't added this stuff as well. So they're trying to entice you to use this stuff more and to make critical strike damage and vulnerable damage a little less useful in the game, which in my opinion is, it is what it is, right? I'm not sure that they're the greatest way to calculate the damage in the game, but this is going to change the way that damage is handled a bit. I mean, the damage is still going to multiply with vulnerable and critical, but you're going to see more of your damage probably than was before come from these bonuses rather than vulnerable and critical. And then lastly, it looks like a lot of miscellaneous buffs have been, decreased. Like total armor has been nerfed, so you're going to be squishier. Total armor and werewolf and werebear form nerfed. Damage reduction from close, distant enemies while bleeding, burning, poisoned, affected by shadow over time, and fortified, all nerfed. So you're not going to be nearly as tanky. You're going to do less damage across the boards. And it looks like most classes got some buffs. But it looks like the game in general is going to be slower to clear enemies. You're going to get less rewards for it. And I had heard a lot about this patch before looking through the patch notes. I've been really busy with Remnant 2 and Baldur's Gate 3. You might have seen those on the channel. We have a lot more content coming to those. But I can see why people are disappointed in Season 1. I can see why these changes are being made by Blizzard. But at the same time, I can see why people are disappointed. Frankly, a lot of the changes that are happening here probably should have happened before launch, before people were allowed to play through level 100 with multiple characters through the game, because they're used to a certain clear speed standard. And now if you slow that down drastically, or even leveling speed, they're going to be upset. And I don't know what the ideal is for these games. A lot of people complaining it's too fast. Some people complaining there's not enough content. This obviously makes it take longer. I'm not sure that's better. I'm just saying, I don't know where the sweet spot is for that. But doing this post-launch at this point, right before a season, I can see why it's demoralizing people. They're going like, why? I've already played 400 hours, 300 hours, whatever you've played. Why would I want to play more with less clear speed and take longer to level up? Like, what's the incentive? Like, you know, there is the new mechanics coming from the season, but obviously all these balances are applying across the whole game. So if you're not playing in the season and you're just playing the regular game, it's just going to be kind of slower, even slower than it is. I'm really curious to hear from you guys, though. I've heard from some people in the Effects for Life community about this already, but I haven't really got to discuss it much. I've been, you know, otherwise occupied, but I really want to hear what your guys' take are. Is this enough to dissuade you from playing Season 1? Were you really excited for Season 1 after they announced the things from Season 1, or are you kind of now thinking about playing something else, getting ready for Remnant, getting ready for Baldur's Gate 3, or perhaps some other game? Let me know in the comments below.